So Jen, thank you very much for being with us today and to help us with our session of stress management. So we wanted to hear from your experience when you were working with WFP and you had to handle complex emergency situations.
Okay, well, thank you. I can tell you about the response that I was involved in to the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. We organised our initial response to the earthquake from Dominican Republic. I was part of a small team that initially went to Dominican Republic to get that started. And it was very intense, and the scale up of the response was immediate and extremely rapid. So, really within 24 hours we were starting to deploy large numbers of staff, consultants, standby partners. And also one of the things that we had initially thought was that we would have to evacuate staff from Haiti. The staff in Haiti, as the UN in general, was affected by the earthquake. Staff had lost colleagues and relatives, family members, and so we anticipated that we may have to evacuate people. We ended up evacuating 5 people actually, including 2 children. But for the most part, our colleagues remained in Haiti and continued working in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. With all that involves, the trauma that some of them must have experienced, yet they continued working. And I think what I noticed about that is that when people started to come out of Haiti eventually for R&R and arrived to Dominican Republic, that sometimes for them, the arrival in Dominican Republic was the time that perhaps they started to relive some of the more traumatic moments around the earthquake, because up until then they were in such an intense environment, living in very close conditions with colleagues. They were using tents. There was one bathroom between hundreds of people, so they were working in this really intense environment. But when they came to Dominican Republic and it was quieter and safer, that's when maybe some of them really started to experience more the trauma. And that was a difficult time, I think.
And what was your personal experience, in being in the emergency?
I think for all of us in Dominican Republic, we all felt that no matter how hard we worked and how little sleep we got, and how intense and stressful the environment was, we knew that our colleagues in Haiti were having a much harder time because of the conditions in Haiti in that moment. So we just kept thinking about them really, and how we could best help. And I think that was very motivating for people to just keep working. On the other hand, I think that the things that we did to try to take care of each other, like for example, we ended up with a team of staff counsellors that weren't there at the beginning, but it became quite apparent quickly that we would need staff counsellors, and so a team did come. But again, I think a lot of the people that were working in Dominican Republic felt that we didn't necessarily need their support as much as the people coming in and out of Haiti. So one thing I can say as officer in charge for myself, I tended to notice when other people were tired and seemed very stressed, and I would encourage them to rest. But I didn't necessarily follow my own advice. So I'm not sure that I'm the best person to talk about stress management, really.
But you told me a very interesting experience about, one day that your colleagues told you need to rest, and what happened then?
Well, yes, that actually eventually somebody else came to take over as officer in charge. When the response became so big, we ended up with a much larger team, and someone came from Rome as the new officer in charge, and I remained as the deputy. And he arrived, took one look at me, and said, "Well, when was the last time that you rested?" And I probably didn't really remember. So he immediately told me to take the afternoon off. And I felt like I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't feel that I was kind of calm enough to just go and sleep. And I happened to go past a hair salon, so I decided to go and get my hair blow dried. And I suppose there was something about needing to be pampered and looked after in that moment that appealed to me. So I got my hair blow dried. I think I did then go and have a bit of a sleep, and then went back to work in the evening. And it was funny because when I walked back into a room full of, maybe 200 people, everyone started applauding when they saw me with my newly blow-dried hair. So I guess I looked more human than they were used to seeing me.
This is funny. And you also told me a story about when you had to accompany a kid that was badly injured, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, that was intense. We evacuated, as I said, a family, a WFP family with 2 children, and the children were quite seriously injured. One particularly with crush injuries, which can cause kidney problems, and the child needed dialysis. So I spent some time in the hospital with the family, and I met the ambulance at the airport and accompanied them to the hospital. There was a need for somebody to remain with each child, and that we only had one parent. So I stayed for as long as I could, and then WFP actually helped by deploying a doctor who was working in our regional office in Panama, and he then came and stayed with one of the children in the hospital for as long as needed. But that was an interesting sort of backdrop to the work that we were doing in terms of responding to these huge needs in Haiti, was to actually then have this sort of more intimate work with one family that were very personally affected by the situation. I found it, to be honest, I think that's probably something that I found to be very rewarding, to know that family, to accompany them through that process, to get to know their children, and to eventually see, several months later, the children both be able to walk out of the hospital. It was a very rewarding experience for me, and I remember that they needed blood transfusions at different times along the way, and several times I called for, WFP staff to go and donate blood at the hospital so that they would be able to have the blood transfusions, and they did. WFP staff donated blood. I felt that the support from the WFP team for that family was just extremely strong, and it made me feel very, very positive about working for WFP.
And Jane, if you talk with a group of people that are getting ready to be deployed to emergencies, what would be your main tips or advice for managing stress?
I think it's important to pay attention to your own stress, but in that kind of situation, I think it's also quite important to try to pay attention to other people's stress too. Not by telling them, oh, you're really stressed and you need to do this, that or the other, but just by trying to take care of each other, be mindful of when people last rested, have people been eating, and just sort of remind people that in this kind of intense environment, for everyone to be able to keep going, each person needs to take care of themselves first, really. And sometimes that's difficult, so we all need to be reminded sometimes. So that's one thing that I would say. The other thing that I would say is that if you're deploying to an emergency situation, I think I said at the beginning, you have to be prepared for the unexpected. So if you go in there expecting that you will have certain things, that certain things will be in place, and that that may not be the case. One of the things, for example, was that staff were told that were deployed to Haiti that they must bring their own tent. We did have people who showed up without tents, and then expected that somehow, that problem would be resolved by the organisation, but we didn't have any spare tents, certainly not in Haiti. And what had happened in Dominican Republic was that so many people purchased tents and sleeping bags in Dominican Republic, there were none left available to buy. So, people that came and said, well, I've been deployed, I expect that, I will be provided with accommodation. Effectively couldn't really be deployed then because we didn't have anything for them. So to clearly follow any instructions that you're given about what you need to take, even if it seems unusual, and then to be adaptable in the situation. Don't blame other people when things are not in place, or create problems for the team. Just try to be adaptable. to the situation, and try to keep positive, even though it's really very difficult.
Yeah. And if people are feeling extremely stressful, what would be your recommendation in those cases?
Well, as I said, having the staff counsellors in that situation was really essential. If there is a staff counsellor or some other access to counselling, I think that's what I would most recommend. Of course, in some situations that might not be possible. Then I would say, try to find a very good and understanding friend to talk to about how you're feeling, and also to just not to be too worried about maybe saying to your leader in that situation that you feel like maybe you need to take some time away, because when we work in emergencies, I think there's this sort of sense that we've all got to be somehow very tough, superhuman, emergency humanitarian workers, but the reality is that the emergencies response goes on for a really long time, and you're in that intense environment for a very long time, so you may be able to cope quite well most of the time, but if you have that moment where you're not coping so well, I think it's important to somehow find some support or to take some time out for yourself.
Wonderful, Jayne. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Have a good day.